I'm here with computer scientist Kentaro Toyama, author of the book Geek Heresy, Rescuing Social Change from the Cult of Technology. Kentaro is an AI researcher at Microsoft and is currently researching the impact of digital technology on society. But the reason I wanted to talk to you today, Kentaro, is you had this fascinating take on why AI experts can't understand or predict AI behaviors. And I want you to talk about that. But first, can you just set up really quickly, explain what the AI interpretability problem is, also called explainable AI?
Basically, the current AI systems that are in the press so much are such large, complicated computer systems. When you say explainable AI, the challenge is that these days, even the people who design AI systems don't fully understand what those systems are doing. They can't predict what the systems will do 100%. And they can't even explain why the AI system produced a certain result. AI now is getting to the point where, in terms of at least kind of like the quantitative complexity, it's beginning to rival the human brain. We are used to, as human beings, understanding the machines that we devise. We're now in an era in which a lot of the machines that we'll be working with no longer are predictable in the way that we usually assume.
Okay. Your take on AI uninterpretability is that it's a feature and not a bug. We don't consider things intelligent unless we can't understand how they work. Can you explain that?
We think of things that are completely predictable as not being too intelligent, right? Like, so if you ask me the same question 10 times and my response is exactly the same canned expression, you will say, well, that's robotic, and robotic in the old sense where there wasn't much AI behind it. As human beings, we ascribe intelligence partly to things that are unpredictable, right? In addition to being able to answer complicated questions, we want them to be creative. And so it might be that interpretability is actually not something we want from a system that we want to believe is intelligent. And the converse of that is might mean that a true AI system that we think of as human-like won't be interpretable by definition.
If predictable means unintelligent to us, then what's going to happen when humans don't understand AI, but AI has interpreted us? Like if machines can predict all our decisions, are we in trouble?
I actually think that there's a limit to how much anything can predict our decisions, in the same way that we still have trouble predicting each other. I think that's due to the sheer complexity of the human brain, as well as the processes that cause us to think and generate output. Anything that's going to seem to have human-like intelligence is going to be similar in that way. The unpredictability is inherent. Now, it is true that AI will probably help predict more and more about us, but I think there's some natural limit to how predictable we are as well. To the extent that we're talking about human beings and AIs interacting, we'll find each other equally unpredictable, except in those cases where the AI systems are intentionally designed to be a little bit more predictable.
So what are the variables that are insurmountable for making us predictable to AI?
It goes back to complexity. For example, in physics, there's this very well-known problem called the three-body problem, where if you just took an empty space and put three objects in there, the way they would move according to gravity becomes unpredictable very quickly, period, right? And that's just three entities. Well, our brain is a lot more complicated than that. There's a limit to how much the universe is predictable, in the same way that we can predict the weather, much more than a few days out. That's kind of inherent in physics. It's really a problem of limitations to predict the future. That is going to be true for the human mind or human-like AI.
Some researchers are saying the only thing that's going to be able to interpret AI is another AI. So you would disagree there?
Yeah, even another AI might not be able to, interpret. I think a lot of this rides on what we mean by interpret. I do think that we will end up developing AI systems that are better about explaining their thought process in the same way that human beings can often explain their thought process. And some people are better at that than others. But there'll still be a limit.
How do you feel about the AI existential threat? From techno-optimist to doomer, where do you fall on the spectrum?
Yeah, I'm definitely with the doomers, I guess, in the sense that, that's going back to unpredictability. Unpredictability is scary. Once it meets human intelligence, we're talking about a system that could conceivably keep improving itself so that it becomes smarter and smarter and smarter, which is something that at least so far human beings cannot really do in a meaningful way, right? Like, no matter how much I understand about my brain, I can't actually change my neurons in a way that makes me smarter. But a computer could do that. An AI could do that. And so at a point where a computer becomes more intelligent than us and arguably much more difficult for us to understand, how it acts is of great concern. And then putting that aside, I think the real challenge, we're going to have AI systems that, that currently are being developed mostly by companies whose main goal is profit, right? And so as long as that's the case, and, we've already seen all kinds of instances where the profit motive does bad things to everybody else. As long as that's the case, we're in for some potential misfortune as some AI goes rogue, even if it wasn't intended to do anything negative.
Do you see any solution on the horizon?
There are lots of people thinking about policy solutions. I mean, I personally think that there should be a dramatic slowdown and regulation on the order of the way we regulate nuclear weapons. It's much harder with AI to regulate because it is true that anybody with a powerful enough computer can replicate a lot of what is known currently. But it's also true that at least the current systems require significant resources to develop. And so regulating those entities, I think, is urgent.
Is the required compute power for these AI systems, is that scaling down?
Things that seem to be human-like in terms of their intelligence are necessarily going to require a certain amount of compute power. That compute power itself, as we've already seen in the history of computing so far, every year becomes cheaper and cheaper. Just a few months ago, soon after the release of ChatGPT, I saw that somebody had basically enabled the part of ChatGPT that just, that most of us see, which is where you can interact and talk with it. They had managed to get it down to the point where it could run a small scale version of it on a regular computer like the one that you and I have.
Stanford's Alpaca?
Yeah, there's definitely systems like that out there now.
So AlphaGo, the AI Go champion, was recently exploited for a newly discovered blind spot, and it didn't know what a group was. Since we're facing a possible existential threat, do you see anything in these systems that might be now or at some point in the future exploited, like an AI Achilles heel?
I mean, I think even now, as amazing as AI technology is today, there's all kinds of things it still cannot do. Actual human intelligence is still not quite there. And hopefully, there will be all kinds of Achilles heels. One of them is that for most computers, there's somewhere where there's electricity and there's a plug point, and you can literally unplug the whole thing.
Yeah, somebody asked it how it might get around us trying to shut it down. It says something about radio waves.
I guess, you could have an electromagnetic pulse or something. I can also foresee situations where intelligent AI system that's being told to do something by whoever owns it ends up creating little miniature copies of itself in various other computers in the same way that we already have viruses.
So it used to be widely assumed that creativity was the final frontier for AI as it nears human level intelligence. And now we're largely disabused of that assumption. What do you think is going to be the thing that gets us to AGI, artificial general intelligence?
At least the current state of systems like ChatGPT are actually not good at logical deduction and logical thinking. This is something I've tried myself. You can ask ChatGPT to multiply two 4-digit numbers. It will get it wrong more often than it will get it right. Okay, now this is an incredibly, quote unquote, intelligent system, but something as simple as basic arithmetic, it can't completely do. And it's because currently there's not a special processing for logic. Everything that it does that seems like logical thinking is a kind of a byproduct of the way that it's doing things, which is it's effectively creating human-like sentences, some of which are logical. But as a lot of people have found, when you actually ask it very direct logical questions, it often gets those wrong. There's a debate currently among people who work on AI about whether that logic needs to be explicitly built in to an AI system or whether the current way that deep learning and neural network models work can eventually get that logic with enough data and training. I tend to side with the people who think that you need to build it in specially. Regardless of that, the reality is current AI systems haven't yet melded those two. I mean, it's kind of funny because we have computers that can do great arithmetic, right? So we've been able to do that for decades. Eventually, I think we'll find ways to meld these things together. Until that happens, truly human intelligence won't be achieved.
But do you think some aspect of it not being logical is that it's not embodied or multimodal? It's not having a connection to the world to attach these concepts to?
I do think that's also another challenge, but there are AI systems that can effectively understand imagery in a way that is increasingly like a human being, right? I used to do computer vision research, which is the study of how to do AI for images. And I used to say that the holy grail in this field was I give a computer an arbitrary photograph, and the computer tells me in words what is contained in that photograph. Well, today we have systems that do exactly that, and they're amazingly good at it. It's probably months away, if not days away, where there are systems that can easily meld that kind of thinking with what ChatGPT is already doing.
And where do you land on whether or not AI is or could become conscious?
I personally don't think computers are ever going to be conscious. There are philosophers who think one day there will be some kind of proof that they're conscious, but I think at least for now, current science can't even provide proof that we as individual human beings are individually conscious. So we won't know. We just can't know, and I suspect that computers will never actually be conscious.
Since consciousness is so fundamental yet still such a mystery, why do you think we have this pervasive tendency to default to like, we don't know, therefore it's unlikely?
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I think for me, a basic test of consciousness is, does the thing experience pain? People who study consciousness have not yet come to any kind of consensus as to how we feel pain. It's one of the greatest mysteries of the world, right, of the universe. To me, that's the essential aspect of consciousness, because if you don't feel pain or pleasure, then you can say all kinds of things and spout all kinds of output, but I don't have any moral worries about turning you off, which is the equivalent of killing somebody. And there's various different theories. Depending on which theory you subscribe to, I think it's conceivable that its AI system could eventually come to feel pain and register pain. But I'm skeptical. I'm personally skeptical.
Do you think there could be some version of AI suffering that has nothing to do with pain receptors in a nervous system?
Yeah, it doesn't have to be about the receptors. It doesn't have to be about the neurons. It's just the registering of actual, pain and pleasure.
What do you think is the most important question with AI research right now?
I mean, personally, I do think that the most practical challenge facing us as human society right now with respect to AI is really how to regulate it. Who should benefit from everything that AI does? Shouldn't we be much more careful about indicating when something is produced by computer versus by human? To who gets the credit if you invent an AI system that does something that you couldn't yourself do, but the AI system does, right? Like, should you be credited with that, or should the machine? What does it mean to credit a machine, and who should benefit from it? There's lots of these questions, and we haven't even begun to scratch the surface. And we haven't yet really passed any laws that really address these questions in a big way. And I think we have to start doing that.
And you're not optimistic we'll pull this off?
I mean, it is widely known among legal scholars that the law is usually behind the technology. Like, by the time the technology is done, all kinds of regulations that should have been put in place are not there. Personally, I'm optimistic in the long run, but pessimistic in the short run. I think usually these things require some kind of crisis before we respond and act. And it has to be a crisis of just the right size, right? If it's a world-ending crisis, then we've lost the opportunity. And if it's too small of a crisis, then nobody will care. But if it's just the right size of crisis, then it will cause us to take it seriously and start regulating.
So our only hope is just the right size crisis.
Right.